Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Welcome to this week's Hey, I Want Your Job. And I have to say, I'm on the fence about whether or not I actually want Danny's job. Danny, what is your job title?
You want my job, Michelle? I mean, I don't know what my job title is. I'm an international speaker. I have a company that teaches parents how to get their kids to love reading, and I'm right now working with a wonderful partner in Ireland. We've created a social media platform for kids that teaches kids positive habits. So I guess the job title would be Jack of all trades, master of none.
So I think that what you do is really cool in that educational space, in that living kids. I mean, clearly your job title has got to be like CEO of Danny's World, right? Like that's obviously you need to get a business card that says that. No trademark. You're welcome. You can have that one. That's fine. So I love all of the stuff that you do. Obviously, as a mom, I have a vested interest in it, but also I'm the only member of my family that is not in the educational space.
Hmm,
I know I'm the black
lucky
sheep
you.
so many ways. So my sister is a fifth grade teacher. She won best in district. So just say
Hey, great,
awesome one.
congrats.
My brother was a math teacher and now he is CTO for a school district here in Texas. His wife is a professor. So literally it's like they're all talking about pedagogy. And then I'm like, I don't understand. I have a boring like corporate job. So but if I say it's near and dear to my heart. So let's start with the basics. How did you wind up doing what you do? Because that's not like there's not a really obvious like apply for this job here path, right? So how did this happen, Danny?
Well, I'll try and be as brief as possible, but I'll warn you right now, Michelle, I tend to have long answers to short questions. It's actually ironic I entered education. I was a journalist and I was working for a wonderful company in Washington, D.C., and I got job offers all around the country to be a journalist for various daily newspapers. And then I got one offer at a major daily where I was going to get the city beat for $16,500 a year, and then a friend notified me, oh, they're looking for teachers in South Central Los Angeles for
Yeah.
$25,000 a year. And
Sign
so I
me.
always tell people I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay.
There you
And
go.
I've been in education now for over 25 years. I absolutely love it. And really now what I'll do when I'm speaking is I go around the country reminding teachers and administrators to bring the joy back in education and to not quit, because we really need. I admire that your whole family's in education. It's always been difficult. It's a little bit more trying now than ever before, and maybe it's because I used to be a journalist. I like to put things in simple language. I don't like words like pedagogy. Nobody understands that. It's just, what can we do to really help kids? And when I was an administrator, I always was one of these annoying people that asked why. Because for me, if the answer to the question is not because that's what's best for kids, my answer is, why are we doing it then? So I'm very passionate, and especially with families that feel disenfranchised.
I think my siblings, I know my siblings have said any number of times that anytime the word pedagogy gets used in in the educational setting, that is usually the administrator using that word to answer why on something that is totally bullshit, right? They're saying, well, why do we have to, be here at 6 o'clock? Well, it's a pedagogical blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. No, it's a thing that you said we have to do. But that is usually, it is according to them, and I am not in the space, it is the official, unofficial educational buzzword that means because I said so. So
Yeah, if you want to win an argument, I always say use really confusing vocabulary words, or just claim that Harvard did the study. You know, I always say Harvard did the study because if Harvard did the study, it must be more legitimate than if Texas
absolutely.
A&M did the study.
Oh, now see, I'm from Texas. I would not say that out loud in Texas. Absolutely not. For the record, to all of my family that bleed maroon, I did not say what Danny just said about Tamu. So for real. Um, so obviously you're passionate about actually making things better. And let's just like jump in with like where we are right now, because I am inundated on one half of my business with dozens, if not hundreds of people trying to GTFO from education.
Hmm.
That like it wasn't a straw that broke the collective camel back. Like these last year have been like a whole like forest on them, and all the pressures that were already there, they are leaving as quickly and as they possibly can. What what would your recommendation or advice be to educator authorities and administrators that want teachers to not leave in droves? Like, how do they bring that fun? How do they mitigate that weight that they've dumped on them? That is why people are trying to leave.
Well, that's a very long question, Michelle. There's all
It
kinds
is.
of complications there. There's some people say the glass is half full, some say it's half empty. I'm neither of those people. I think the glass is overflowing. Everybody else is going to tell you the pandemic's the worst thing ever to happen to education. I believe it's the best thing to happen in the last 150 years because it's forcing us to rethink and re-examine what we do in education. I always love it when I hear people say they have the answer to education. Now, I have a lot of background in education, and I really don't know specifically the answer. I do know that they're asking the wrong question, and the question that I often hear is, "What's the best way to help students?" And I'm like, "That's the wrong question. The proper question is, what are the best ways to help students?" Because there are 36 answers. For some students, a traditional public education is fantastic. Some kids, private schools. Some kids, it's charter schools. Some kids, it's vocational schools. Some kids, it's magnet schools. Some kids, it's homeschools. Every kid is different. And that's where I always get a laugh out of businesses trying to compare schools to businesses. I'm like, well, businesses, you're just dealing with the same widgets. You don't have moving parts. All kids are a little bit different. And when I'm working with teachers and administrators, I always say, if you have 33 kids in your classroom, you probably have 33 completely unique motivational and learning styles, and you have to accommodate based on the needs of every single student. And so there's more than one right answer. For the teachers that are struggling, I was blessed. I spent most of my career in South Central Los Angeles, a town named Compton. And I was the only man at my school. I was the only white person at my school. I taught with predominantly elderly African-American women from the South who all had been teaching for at least 20 years. And my mentor was Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner was from Alabama. Mrs. Turner had been teaching for 40 years, and she believed in two things, Michelle: discipline and the Bible. When her little ones got out of line, she started reading aloud Revelations to them. And it was this saint of a human being that took me under her wing, because at that time, my principal was Mrs. Lucifer. And Mrs. Lucifer would come into my classroom on her broomstick with her permascal and her foreboding clipboard, and she would tell me everything that I was doing wrong. And it was the wonderful Mrs. Turner who took me under her wing, and she said, "You're not going to last long if you let that negative energy affect you." She's like, "Miss Brassell, next time negative energy comes in this classroom, you do as I do. Oh, then you shut the door and do it your way." She's like, "Miss Brassell, I've been teaching here for 40 years. They've had 35 different reading programs. I got one, mine, and it works." And I was so blessed to have a
Wow.
positive mentor in my corner. And I think that's what all of us really need, not just in education. All of us need that person that believes in us often when we don't believe in ourselves. And that's what I'm doing a lot. I'll be speaking tomorrow in New Mexico to a school district that everybody's just drained. And I'm there to get everybody laughing and not really teach anybody what they don't know, but to remind them why they got into education in the first place.
I think that's fantastic, and I love the complexity of that answer. I do wonder though, like, I it makes me want to take it a step back
Mhm.
further. Like, is the question, what things should we be doing to help students? Or is it, what are we trying to achieve with students?
Mm.
Because it feels like in a lot of ways, education has lost a little bit of its direction,
Yeah.
and it's become, it feels as a parent and a consumer of media and listener to of siblings who whine about being teachers, um, that, in a lot of ways, the schools have become about, we have to keep attendance at a certain level so that we get federal dollars,
Yeah.
and that we have to achieve certain percentage results on standardized tests, and that has become the focus of education, rather than, and we haven't taken a beat as a country to step back and say, what is it we're trying to achieve and why?
I
um,
love that. That's a good fundamental question, Michelle, because I think that I completely agree with you. I've listened to some politicians say that the point of the American education system is to produce college graduates, and I vehemently deny.
yeah.
I
Why?
I completely disagree with that. First of all, it's not guaranteed anywhere in the U.S. Constitution that you're entitled to an education. It's a concept that Thomas Jefferson offered, but it's not in the Constitution anywhere. But secondly, the point of our educational system is to produce tax-paying citizens. And if you want to, there's a great a fellow podcaster of yours, Mike Rowe. I love his podcast. The way I heard it, Mike Rowe used to host Dirtiest Jobs, and he has a foundation, and I completely agree with him. There's over, I think now it's over 9 to 10 million jobs in America that don't require a college degree. They just require a skill set. And I think we should be really encouraging people to look at vocations as possible alternatives to college. I mean, I tell people right now, the average teacher is required to take all these courses and get in debt for college education, whereas you could become a truck driver tomorrow and make a very good wage. And we need truck drivers in this country. That's one of these things that people have to get out of their minds is I used to ask kids, well, what's more important, your arms or your legs? And they'd kind of be stumped. I'm like, well, here's the answer. They're both important. Neither one's more important than the other. And I think if more Americans would kind of actually come together and realize all of us have a part in this system, we'd be much better off. So I think it's a great fundamental question that you're asking. It's kind of what I always used to ask Michelle. Why? Why are we doing this? If it's just because to reach some random number that somebody decided is important, and I mean that doesn't tell us anything. There's that great scene in Good Will Hunting where they talk about, actually I don't think he says it completely in Good Will Hunting, but I always talk about a bottom graduate from the Naval Academy and a top graduate from Harvard. There was this top graduate from Harvard named Ted Kaczynski, who became the Unabomber, and there was a bottom graduate from the Naval Academy who became Senator John McCain. And I'm like, school doesn't tell you how people are going to do. I used to always tell my kindergartners, I'm like, gosh, I hope to God this isn't the best year of your life. I hope it's next year and the year after. I mean, the windshield's a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. I played high school football with guys that are still talking about when we played high school football together. I'm like, man, folks, we got to keep on looking forward and getting better every single day. And that's what I'm always trying. That's my point with kids is I want kids to leave my class feeling good about themselves. I really want them to be naturally curious for the rest of their lives. So they're questioning everything. I tell people there's no such thing as fake news. There's people who depend on one news source. All of us have this thing between our ears. You shouldn't be just listening to one person. You should be actually reading and looking at multiple sources of information. And if I can encourage kids to be lifelong learners, critical learners, I used to teach history. When I started teaching, I taught history at high school. And I used to tell the kids two things. First of all, history books are usually written by the winners. Every event in history has multiple points of view. And I said, in this class, we're going to learn, not, I'm not going to teach you how to think. I'm not going to teach you what to think. I'm going to teach you how to think. You got to be critical in your thinking and question everything. So I think we'd be much better off if we had that rather than a bunch of masses that are like a cult just nodding in agreement with, you don't want to be around people like that. You want to be around people that challenge you.
So that was great. I'm not sure that we answered the question. So let's come back and see if the two of us together, if we just were in charge of the world for a hot minute here, Danny.
Mhm.
I think, and you can tell me why I'm wrong, that a great goal for the American educational system should be to produce citizens with the fundamental knowledge base that they need to be productive, self-sustaining members of society. And to part of that to be to inspire a continual curiosity and love of learning
I
in
love
as
it.
many of them as possible.
Great mission statement. I love it.
Okay, so we
I'm a
agree. I got
Baptist.
it right. Hey,
I'm a Baptist. I'm a Baptist in your front row, Michelle. Amen. I love it. That's great. That's
okay.
great.
So
Well,
if
it's actually the reason I developed my reading program was I always challenge parents and teachers. I'm like, I think schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read?
yeah,
I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it because, like you just said, they're naturally curious and want to learn something.
so we've just fixed education. Well done, us.
Great. What's next?
Right? So
Healthcare.
now, no, oh, good golly. Definitely not on that one today. I
Uh-huh.
think we only have an hour here, Danny. So what I do want to talk about is actually reading. So
Great.
I have been, as you can probably guess, I come from a very academic family.
Mhm.
Books have always been a thing. And I had never known anybody who did not have a true I had always assumed that all smart people had a love of learning.
Mm.
And then I met the fabulous man that I'm married to. And I cannot tell you, to my dad's dying day, he was always disappointed that my husband would not talk to him about books. And every time he'd be like, "Oh, have you read such and so book?" And my husband would be like, "No, Jerry, I don't read. I don't enjoy it." I did not realize until him that not everybody naturally pictures what they read as they read it. And like that they don't just that this I just assumed that that was a thing that all humans naturally did. I have now been educated that that is not the case, and that especially with some forms of neurodivergence, that that's something you have to teach them to do. Um, or you get my husband, who is like, I can see words on the page, I can understand words from the page. There's no like,
Mhm.
he's like, I'm not going on adventures in my head. And that to me, as a reader, as somebody who loves that, is one of the saddest things I have ever heard,
Mhm.
genuinely. Talk to me about like what that means, like at to use the bad word pedagogy, as a pedagogue, like as a teacher, where is that teachable moment? How does this happen? And what as a parent do I need to do to make sure that my kids don't wind up in the same boat that my husband's in?
Great. Well, your husband didn't have me as a teacher. He'd love reading if I was his teacher. Because I was your husband, Michelle. I grew up hating reading. The only thing I would read is a TV guide. It's
Yep.
ironic because my father was a public librarian,
Oh
and
wow.
I always hated the public library. The furniture was uncomfortable. It always smelt funny in the public library to me. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out in the public library. I always hated it. And it wasn't until I actually started teaching in the inner city and I saw how most of my students had a lot of disadvantages compared to me that I said, shame on me. I mean, Michelle, I was really blessed without realizing it. Both of my parents were together. We weren't wealthy. We were very lower middle class, but we always had food on the table. We always had plenty of access to books around us. My parents read in front of us and they read to us. And I realized, shame on me, I had a whole bunch of advantages. A lot of kids have never been exposed to these things. And it really gets back to what I was saying is that, you know, your husband grew up in Britain, and I guarantee you he was force fed, Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare. And there's nothing wrong with any of those authors, but I bet you as his teacher, I would find out what your husband was interested in. Usually I find like little boys, they'll love sports. And so if I started reading him books about football, he'd be interested. Or, I don't know what your husband's interested in. Maybe he's
Video
interested.
games, totally video games.
Yeah, so
Yeah, 'cause
I
that
would
was
read.
another problem, right? Because again, the teachers, exactly like you said, all the little boys are like, "Oh, don't you wanna talk about footy?" And my husband was like, "I could not care less about football if I tried."
Well, no, which is fine. Which is fine though, because there's a great. I love the Jeff Kinney's just wonderful. He wrote the Diary of the Wimpy Kid series, and there's this wonder. I don't remember which of the books it was, but the mother decides she's going to start a mother-son book club, and so she invites all the boys from the neighborhood to bring a book to their first book club meeting. And the mother, she's brought like Anne of Green Gables, Little House on the Prairie, Sarah Plain and Tall, and the boys have brought like How to Cheat at Video Games, the Book of Dinosaurs, the Book of Bodily Functions. And I'm like, that's exactly right. You build the reading program based on the interest. I mean, if your husband's into video games, there's tons of video game books that I would be reading to him to get him excited. Oh, I'm like, oh, I can get you to the next level if you read this chapter. And so, that's going to spark his interest. I always tell people it's not reading unless you're into it yourself. The happiest day of my life, besides my wedding day, was when I earned my PhD. My wife asked me, well, why are you so happy? I'm like, because from now on, I pick the books. And to me, that's what reading really is when you actually pick. I mean, the pedagogical research is very clear on this, Michelle. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. I can tell you that the little boy who only reads books about cheating at video games is going to be a better reader than the little boy who's not reading anything. And so basically, your husband just grew up in an environment where that wasn't emphasized. And so the second part of your question was how to make sure that your kids don't wind up like that. Well, your kids have to see you and your husband reading. You have to emphasize it. And even if your husband is just reading the newspaper or something, that's a message to the kids. Kids mimic us.
Yeah.
There was a great freaky anti-drug commercial in the mid 1980s, and this dad, he finds marijuana in his son's room, and he's like, where did you learn how to do this? And finally the son's had enough.
Yes, I remember
He's
the
like,
yes.
you dad, I learned it from you. And that's exactly right.
And that is the dad that is not good at hiding his stash, and that I'm
That's
just
right.
saying. I'm just
Hide your
saying.
stash. That's the point.
Right.
Yeah. So I
Do
mean,
better.
kids, yeah, do what I say, not what I do. I mean,
Sure.
kids have to see that there's an emphasis. Can I just give you a quick tip for you as a
Yeah,
parent?
yeah.
So this is one of the best tips I give to parents is I have a feeling that television is here to stay. And so I'm a big believer in embracing technology and figuring out how it can help us. President Bush Sr. over 30 years ago signed a very important law in this country that said every television set in America has to have closed captioning. So here's the tip: turn on the closed captioning on the TV. Now, when I suggest this at live events with parent groups, they'll be like, well, wait a sec, if the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Michelle, have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? That's very
Oh,
difficult to do. Your brain
yes,
is
it is.
directed towards the text. And there's actually research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more you watch TV, the lower the reading scores are in every single country in the world except for one. The country that watches the most TV in the world also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people ask me, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they do is they import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Welcome Back, Kotter and Brady Bunch, and they have to subtitle them all the time. The kids are constantly reading. Turn on the closed captioning. That's an instant way to get your kids reading without them feeling like they're being force-fed reading.
I mean, they're 3 and 5, so, I mean, we're not at
Right.
the, actual reading stage. Right now, we just try to get, express that we are excited about books and about learning, and I think that I love your point that they mimic, and so if I'm excited about a book that I'm reading, if my husband is excited about something that he's reading, that's a really good way to kind of start that. But we also get excited about reading things as a family, and
Good.
that is one of their favorite things. They love and we so I am interested in something that we have been trying of late
Okay.
with getting them to, because we're trying to transition into chapter books
Hmm.
and transition into like, hey, we can have more than like, 3 pages with mostly pictures as a
Uh-huh.
book, and that can be fun. And so we're trying to do some of that, and then having the fact that there is a movie as a background. So like, well, before we can watch the movie, we have to understand the book. So let's read
Great.
the book, and then we read Charlotte's Web, and then we can go watch Charlotte's Web as the movie, except that we can't because my oldest would just cry. Like, he would not be able to handle the death of Charlotte. It would
Yeah.
not be a thing for him. He would lose his shit. We tried
Yep.
Dumbo Danny. It was awful. We had to stop the movie, console the child. He was like, "Why would they not let him have his mommy? That's messed up." And I was like, "I know, it's okay. It's gonna be fine. It's a Disney film. It's all gonna be good in the end." Um,
I'll give you a book recommendation then. So there's a great book by a British comedian, Jeannie Willis, called Tadpole's Promise. So Tadpole's Promise is about a caterpillar who's in love with a tadpole, and she says, "Tad, I love you. Just make me one promise. Promise me you'll never change." And Tadpole says, "Oh, I love you, caterpillar. I'll never change." Well, what happens to Tadpole? He starts to change, and Caterpillar, she's like, you lied to me, and she dumps him. Well, then the caterpillar, she climbs up the tree, she forms a cocoon, and a couple of weeks later, she emerges from the chrysalis a butterfly, and she realizes, I was too harsh on Tad. All of us go through changes, and so
and then the frog eats the butterfly.
she
Wait,
flies down to Tadpole to apologize, and now he's a bullfrog, and he sticks out his tongue and he eats her. The
yes.
end. And
Oh, I
my
love that.
kindergartners are always like, she dies, and I'm like, be nice to each other, kids. This is why you don't
Circle of
want
life,
movies
my
for
friends.
kids.
Circle of life.
But that's what's
Absolutely.
great. No, I think what you're doing is a great strategy. I do that. I've never understood why people have a problem with the movies, because I think they're great. And I'll let kids watch the movie before they read the book. And here's what they always say, no matter what, is, wow, the movie's good. The book's actually a lot better. That's exactly what I want them to understand. I like what you're doing to read it before the movie, because you picture what the characters and the settings look like on your own. And so you're always going to have a problem with the movie, because you're like, wait, that's not how I pictured Charlotte. Oh, Wilbur doesn't talk that way. And Templeton, oh, he's a lot more interesting than the movie made him. So,
And that's kind of our hope, is to have that dialogue around like,
mhm,
does that look like what you thought? So like we did Jumanji.
mhm.
They were like, that is not what happened in the book, mama.
That's
I was
right.
like,
That's right.
well, the book is like 10 pages and the movie is an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And, they needed Robin Williams to be a bigger character. So they were like, no crocodile tried to eat them in the book, mama. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I get it. I get it. But so yeah, we're trying to use that as like is this is this right? Right? Is this how you pictured, and kind of to encourage them to do that. So that makes me feel better. This is a great conversation, Danny. I have been right
Yeah,
so many times. I never get to be this right in my real life. This
that's
is
great.
fantastic. We should talk all the
I'm
time.
here to affirm you. Now, is your husband reading with you to the kids?
He does. And
Good.
like he knows, like, it was so interesting. So the British educational system is exceedingly different,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and we are old, and we both grew up in times where not only were educational systems and expectations different, but like I went my entire childhood dyslexic and nobody ever noticing.
Mm, wow.
I was just told that I was lazy, like all of the
Uh-huh.
things, right? The people of our generation say that we got told, right? Like, hey, here's a weird thing. She gets like 99th percentile for everything until spelling. And then she's 30th percentile, but nobody is like, hey, maybe that's because she can't see the words, right? So,
Wow.
but yeah, so those types of things for me. And for him, it was around ADHD. He's profoundly
Mhm.
ADHD. Never noticed because his doesn't manifest as the things that we think of as problematic behavior. It's an internal, so he can't focus on things, he needs fidget devices, etc.
Uh-huh.
And so but as a result, it was never diagnosed, and mostly the result of that is he was just completely turned off from education. And
Yeah.
because of how the British system works, nobody kinda gave a shit, and nobody
Yeah.
noticed because they don't have as much ongoing accountability as we do.
Well, what kind of cracks me up about what you're saying, Michelle, is what I hear all the time. I was with a fourth grade boy, and his teacher's like, "Oh, he doesn't know how to read." I'm like, "Well, I was with him for an hour, and in 1 hour, he texted about 20 people. He sent a couple of emails. He Googled about 15 different sites." I'm like, "He's highly literate." She's using a definition from 75 years ago, and that's exactly what I would do with your husband. Is maybe reading doesn't just mean reading Dostoevsky, War and
Right.
Peace. I always love it when people say, "Oh, kids today they don't read." I'm like, kids today are reading so much more than kids in the 18th century. You aren't qualifying what reading is. I mean, tweets and Facebook posts and these things are reading. I mean, now is it literature? No, but I often question if, if literature is the way we should always be defining reading. I mean, I think literature is important, but I don't think that it's the end all be all. I think what's most important at first is to really make reading fun I mean, I've played lots of sports. And when I was playing basketball, if all I would do at practice is dribble the ball and play defense, and I never got a chance to play the game, I would have lost my interest in basketball. But we got to play the game. I see so many classrooms that are focused on these explicit skills
Yep.
and they teach kids how to hate reading. It's like I'm a writer and I always love watching people teach kids how to write. And so many teachers, they spend so much time editing. I'm like, well, that's a great way to get kids to hate writing. I'm like, just get those ideas down on paper. This is how you get a love for writing, is coming up with different stories. And so I just think with your husband, the system wasn't designed for him, and I don't even think today it's designed for little boys
Yeah.
and little girls like your husband. I mean, I think it's. I always tell this to teachers. Anybody can be a teacher. I think teaching is really easy. Being a good teacher is really tough, because being a good teacher, you have to figure out what clicks with every single kid. That's very difficult. It's very time consuming trying to. It's like a good coach. Good coaches, they figure out what kind of players they get, and they design the team around the team. Okay, this is what we're good at this year, so we're going to do this. And it's the same thing as a teacher. I'm like, okay, this is what's working right now. This is what I'm going to do. I love that your husband's actually been reading with your kids. I used to have a nonprofit called Real Dads Read, and I used to always challenge the dads. I'm like, hey, dad, you want to know why your kid likes football so much? Because that's the only time you spend with him. If you spent your time reading with him, he'd be a reader, because kids are looking up to you all the time. And I love, kudos to your husband. Even though he doesn't like to read, he understands the value of him reading to the kids. So both of you deserve kudos for that. You're not the kind of people that I have to work with usually. A lot of people don't realize there's just little basic things that you naturally were doing, that if you do these with your kid's going to be in pretty good shape.
I'll never forget, so one of the first books that, my best friend bought my kids when they were still in utero, was Room on the Broom, and so it's been like a continual thing for them, and so when they got to a certain age, we discovered that there was the animated version, and my son, we watched the first time, and he was just like, "Oh my god, it's on the screen," and we got to the end, and he goes, "Mama, that dragon is not how the dragon sounds." And it was because, like, the delivery, like, the actor had made a very different choice from the way that mommy had always read
Mm.
the book, right? And because I'm a little bit of a sadist, so I like to try to scare the shit out of my kids when I read to them, and so I make sure that the dragon is in fact scary and loud, and they were like, "That dragon is not scary.
Mm.
That's not right, mama." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool. Yay, mommy's version." But yeah, so it's been an ongoing part. It's always been something we do. And now, because my husband loves video games, he's doing a lot of what you said in terms of are using that as the carrot. So they're like, the boys are currently obsessed with Pokemon.
Uh-huh.
But but the Pokemon video games require actually a high degree of literacy, to your
Yep.
point, right? That you have to be able to read the interaction, you have to be able to read the instructions, and so we've said to the boys, "As soon as you guys can read, y'all can play Pokemon. We'll
Yeah.
hook you up. But you have to be able to read to play Pokemon." So, just saying. And they're like, I'm on it. And like every time we remind them of that, like we have a renewed little burst of like, I'm gonna go do all of the phonics stuff. Sounds great, kid. Fantastic. I mean, they're 3 and 5. We're trying not to
Yeah.
be, like you have to read yesterday, but like that's kind of and just turned 5 like a couple weeks ago.
Hmm.
So definitely like trying to help with that. So I love that. And yes, we definitely are trying to be better along those lines. And I love that you've worked with like the dads in reading. And again, I think that I come from a place of privilege where, most of my friends are the yuppie soccer mom types who have all read all of the parenting books and were right arguing about should we be child-led or parent-led household and that sort of thing. So it's just not something that comes up in our circle. And I
Uh-huh.
think that it's good self-awareness that like it doesn't like that our circle is not all the circles out there. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with what you're doing. I mean, this is where I'm going to sound like an old guy. Child led versus parent led. It's always parent led. Like kids need to learn respect of their elders.
the
I see some kids talking to their parents, and I just think of the Willy Wonka song. What do you get when your kid is a brat, pampered and spoiled like a Siamese cat? And then there's like, you know exactly who's to blame. Dun, the mother and the father.
Absolutely. And I will say, we were very cognizant when we made the choice, right? So when I was pregnant and the people were like, yes, you should really do child-led parenting is really, we know that's what's great. And I read the books. I was like, there is not a world in which I'm going to live like that.
Yeah.
That's not like, I cannot do that. I am way too much of a control freak. I would lose my shit. And so instead, we had to go do some research to find parenting models that were the healthiest way to be parent led. So basically, my entire life is like an episode of Bluey at all times. Like that. That's my life. Um, but I want to talk about and get you to weigh in on something that is a hot button topic right now, at least in my circles. And I think you would have a really interesting perspective. We, most of our friends are in a position where they could either send their children to charter schools
Hmm.
or even afford to send them to a private school or some kind of an online academy homeschooling situation, or they could send them to the public school down the road.
Hmm.
And consistently, the dialogue that we are having is where is the balance between I want the best for my kid academically, but also I need my kid to be well socialized and
Mm.
have a balanced view of society and not just hang out with a bunch of other spoiled rich kids.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out where that is. I would love to hear you weigh in on your values and where you see that.
Well, I mean, again, every kid's a little bit different.
Every kid is different. Yeah.
When I do parent trainings, that's one of the first questions parents will ask me is, "What can I do for my kid?" And I'm going to respond the same way I'm going to respond to you, Michelle. Is the fact that you're here right now already tells me 80% of what I need to know. The other 20% we can work on. But if parents are that concerned talking about it, I know the kid's going to be all right wherever they put that kid in school. Now, then it's just a matter of making some decisions, because I believe that we'd all be much better off if we were, around diverse people all the time. And I think that's really important. And when I talk about diversity, often they think of just the color of skin. And I'm like, that's not what diversity is a lot more than just the color of your skin. It's the religion that you choose to practice or not practice. It's your socioeconomic status. I think people need to be exposed to different people. A lot of the problems in the world would not exist if people were forced to be around one another.
I
So
agree. Yeah.
yeah, so I really think that that's really the answer I would give. I have 3 kids of my own, and we're in the best school district in the state, and I don't like the schools. I don't think that they're sufficient. And so now all 3 of my kids are in charter schools. When we lived in California, The schools were fantastic. The public schools were fantastic, and I would have kept them in the public schools. So it's just a matter of choice. And actually, last year during the pandemic, I was so fed up with my youngest daughter's public school that we homeschooled her. And I actually thought we went through a Christian homeschooling program, and I thought that was more rigorous than any other program I have seen. I thought it was incredible. It was actually a little bit too tough, I thought, but it was incredible how much she learned in just a year. Now we have her at a charter school, which even the charter school I'm not too delighted with. But again, I told my wife, I'm like, our kids have us. They're going to turn out all right. I mean, yeah, I don't know about you, Michelle. When I was going to become a parent, I'm like, oh, I want my kids to be doctors and lawyers, and they're, once you have the kids, then my goal was, you know what? I want my kids to be kind people, and I want them to be good, and I want them to do whatever they want and just do their best at whatever they decide they want to.
I want
And
my kids to be happy. I
yeah,
want my kids to be independent,
yeah,
and I want them to be kind. And after
yeah,
that, I don't give a shit.
yeah.
And
I think those are noble goals. I really do. I think we'd
but
all be better off with those, as opposed to, I deal with
everybody has to be, yeah.
I deal with different types of parents.
Oh no, and I am totally a tiger mom as well. Like I say that, but believe me, total tiger mom right here.
Yeah.
And I know that, but it's because from my perspective, I feel like part of my job as a mom is to make sure that when my kids get to the nexus points in their life where they get to pick paths, that they have that I have set them up to be able to choose the path that they want. Whereas if I have not given them the tools, right? So I get frustrated with the parents who don't help educate their kids when they're in high school about what reality of applying to university is. So then like your kid dicks around for 4 years and then it comes time to apply and they're like, "Oh, my baby didn't get anywhere." Well, no. Duh. And that's on you, not on them.
Yeah.
Like you let them dick around. If they got to that point and went, "Mom, I have no desire to go to some big name bougie school. I want
Mhm.
to go be an air conditioning repair guy and go to the trade school around the corner." It's fine with me, Danny. I don't
Yeah.
care. I just want to make sure that they have the option to do what they want to do. And there are things that I have to make sure happens is my personal opinion on that.
That's
That's
great.
really it's my justification for being a pushy tiger mom. And also
I don't think you're a tiger one. I mean, I don't think it's bad to have high expectations for your kids, because it's the same thing when I was a teacher. I used to tell my kids, I'm like, I have high expectations for all of you. You and I both know what your best effort is. And if you don't give me your best effort, I'm going to call you on it.
I'm a huge believer in children will rise to the bar that you set.
Absolutely.
And if
They
you set the bar
they
here,
rise or they drop.
that's
That's
what they
right.
will achieve. So
Completely
like,
agree.
somebody we don't believe in baby talk in this household. I don't believe in speaking in monosyllabic terms to make it easier for small people. My kids don't understand something. They know their job is to ask me, "Mommy, what does that word mean?" Which can be difficult. Uh, but especially when your children know all the words to the musical Hamilton, Danny, which there's a lot
Wow,
of
that's
words in it.
great. That's great.
You say that. How do you there's some words that you would probably rather not necessarily
Yeah,
describe
yeah,
to a
yeah.
3-year-old,
Well,
right?
they're going to hear that when you cut somebody off, when somebody cuts you off on the freeway, they're
Oh,
going
no,
to
the F-bomb, they're totally familiar. That one they needed no clarification. Barter was one that they needed to know
uh,
what that was. Suicide was one they
mhm.
needed to add, like, things that you're like, "Oh, shit, we're driving to school, and now mommy's explaining to a 3-year-old what a suicide is. Okay, here we go." Like, and it's 7 o'clock in the morning. And so, yeah. Um, but so we've never done any of that, and I think I think you're right, that just the pure environment that we live in puts in there. I will say, my oldest son thinks that, like, you don't have a real house if you don't have a cinema room, right?
Oh, wow. Oh, but listen to that. So he just got that from your husband. He called it a cinema room,
Oh,
not
yeah.
like a movie. Because it's funny that you said that, because my wife is from Singapore, and I thought my kids were brilliant when they were young. I look at my wife one day, I'm like, man, our kids are really, they have incredible vocabulary. And she's like, why? I'm like, well, Sean, he just told me that his toy is damaged. And my wife, she went through a British system in Singapore. She's like, well, how would you say it? And I'm like, his toy is broken. And every now and then I catch the British schooling in my kids. You know, they'll say, instead of saying very, they say quite. Oh,
Yep.
it's quite good. I'm like, oh, it's quite good, quite
My
good. No, it's
oldest got
very
into a knockout, drag down fight with his cousin as to whether or not it's a garden or a yard.
good. Yeah, exactly.
His cousin was firmly of the belief that there are no plants, ergo it is a yard. And my
Yep.
son was like, it's still called a garden. I don't understand where the confusion is.
That's great.
They stood and screamed at each other in their underwear for apparently 30 minutes. My sister recorded about 2 minutes of it. It was hilarious. But yeah, so that's really, it's to your point about the different types of diversity. It's the socioeconomic diversity, honestly.
Absolutely.
We have friends that are all flavors of, sexual orientation and age and skin tones and all the rest of it. So like, cool. I am more concerned that like he doesn't think that everybody has a cinema room. Right? That that's not his normal. And that he needs to have an understanding of like where our privilege, in fact, kind of falls on the spectrum. So
Kids need some adversity. When we lived in a very nice community in California, a beach community where everybody was very, well off. And then when we moved to Colorado, my kids had to change schools, they had to make new friends or whatever. And for the first time in their life, they dealt with some real adversity. And I thought, wow, this is good for them that they'll, I mean, because before I remember I had taken the kids, we were in Mexico, and there were some kids begging on the streets, and my kids were asking if they wanted to play. And I'm like, they don't want to play. They're
they gotta
starving to
eat.
death.
Yeah.
And it led to some pretty interesting discussions where the kids needed to be exposed to that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. That's, and that's what I love about books, Michelle, is like books allow you to have a passport without ever leaving the country. During the pandemic, you still get to travel as long as you have a public library card. You can still encounter. With my youngest daughter, we read The Secret Garden. I'd actually never read The Secret Garden because I'm like, why would I be interested in some little British girl? And it was actually a beautiful book. I was like, wow, this is a really well written book. And I enjoyed reading it with her. Oh, that gets to your point about chapter books. Was my strategy with when I was a teacher is I would just read to the kids. I'm like, Harry took out his wand, he looked at Voldemort, and we'll read the rest of this right after recess. All the kids are like, oh, I got to get back from recess on time because I want to hear what happened. I mean, that's how, it's the same thing that TV shows do is they'll leave you on a cliffhanger so that you have to come back next week.
I think my first memory of that from a teacher, they did that with Celery Stalks at Midnight and the Bunnicula book. And I still remember I got sick as a kid and I missed like 3 days of the book. And it was right at the end, Danny. And I was like, as an adult, I went back and read that book because it had like that happened when I was like 5. And in my 20s, it still bothered me that I did not know what happened to Bunnicula.
Absolutely. That's right.
How did they expose the rabbit?
That's right. We need closure for sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
So I love all of that. I cannot believe we have been talking for as long as we have. We're rapidly approaching the end here. So many things I wanted to ask you. So many topics we haven't gotten to. Guide me. What do we need to talk about before we go?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for all that you do, Michelle. I think we all need a little bit more positivity in the world, and the fact that people are listening or watching this podcast, we're on the right track. One of the best things I did in 2021 was I turned off the TV news because it didn't serve me. And so I started listening to a lot more positive, uplifting podcasts like yours because I wanted to learn. I'm like, I want things that put me in a good mood, not in a bad mood. So I wanted to serve you and your audience. So if your audience, if they go to freegiftfromdanny.com, and I know you'll put it in the show notes, everybody's going to get a complimentary electronic copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book, I wrote it for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty positively engaged. And so I said, okay, I'll write you a book. And so every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You read that in 5 minutes. And then I'm also going to give you access to a series of parent trainings, gives you a taste of what I do for my program, which is basically in just over 2 months, I can get kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, love reading. That's my gift to everybody.
I love it. I love it. I love it. All of it. Thank you so much for that. That's so generous of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I mean, I actually have really enjoyed this, Michelle. We did a lot of stuff. Maybe we should hit healthcare or whatever. And I love that. Tell all your relatives I'll come. I'm a resident of Texas every August because all the different school districts have me do their convocation keynote address to get their teachers pumped. I always I make fun of school districts. I'm like, they bring me 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year to pump everybody up, the middle of the year to keep them pumped up, and the end of the year to keep them all from quitting. And it's been so tough these last couple of years. But again, I always take the optimistic viewpoint. And there's all kinds of data that's coming in right now that's kind of interesting. So Harvard did a study. This is fascinating that they're showing that African-American boys are actually doing a lot better now that they've been doing remote learning because they've had a much lower referral rate for discipline, which is one of the things I encountered in the inner city. I saw too many African-American boys that they were enthusiastic and excited, and people misinterpreted that as being a discipline problem. I mean, I taught in Houston, Texas for a little while, and my favorite student of all time, I know you're not supposed to have a favorite student, but I had a favorite student. His name was Howard, and Howard was the son of a Baptist minister, and Howard's father spoke like Martin Luther King Jr., so Howard spoke like Martin Luther King Jr. And so one day I was reading a book to the class called Stuart Little by this guy named E.B. White. And after I read a chapter every day, I always have the kids applaud. So the kids are applauding one day, and one of my little boys, Deshaun, he starts laughing. He's like, I like Howard because he's little. Or I like Stuart because he's little. And Howard stands up. He's like, don't you get it? Don't you get it? We all be little. We all be little. But we be big someday, like Mr. B. And he points at me, and I realize this child could lead a revolt. And Howard was the reason I became a teacher. I love his unbridled enthusiasm. It's what gets me out of bed every single day. And I worried to death for Howard because I knew next year he was getting Miss Hampton. And Miss Hampton was going to misinterpret his enthusiasm as a discipline problem because Miss Hampton is a direct descendant of Darth Vader. And so Howard taught me a valuable lesson, never give a kid an answer, give them a strategy, because sooner or later, all of us are going to have a Miss Hampton to deal with. Have we properly prepared our kids on how to deal with the situation? So kudos to you and your husband, Michelle, for letting the kids listen to Hamilton, because who cares if some of those vocabulary words are a little bit complicated? It actually leads to discussions of some things, frankly, a lot of kids need to know about.
I need my kids to know that when you're down on your knees, you got to rise up.
I rise up, and you want to be the in the room where it happens.
That's right. All the things that they're letting, I'm down.
I love it.
Thank you so much for your time and your enthusiasm and your fabulous offer. Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for all you do, Michelle. God bless.
You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit ONH Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no-nonsense career advice, and real-world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.